Section 21 of A General History of the Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A General History of the Pirates by Charles Johnson. The Trials of the Pirates, Part 2. The court, on the 31st of March, remanded the following 6 before them for sentence: Videlicet, David Simpson, William Magnus, R. Hardy, Thomas Sutton, Christopher Moody, and V. Ashplant, to whom the President spoke to the following purpose: The crime of piracy, of which all of ye have been justly convicted, is of all other robberies the most aggravating and inhumane, in that being removed from the fears of surprise in remote and distant parts, ye do in wantonness of power often add cruelty to theft. Pirates unmoved at distress or poverty not only spoil and rob, but do it from men needy, and who are purchasing their livelihoods through hazards and difficulties, which ought rather to move compassion, and what is still worse, do often by persuasion or force engage the inconsiderate part of them to their own and families' ruin, removing them from their wives and children, and by that from the means that should support them from misery and want. To a trading nation nothing can be so destructive as piracy, or call for more exemplary punishment. Besides the national reflection it infers, it cuts off the returns of industry and those plentiful importations that alone can make an island flourishing, and it is your aggravation that ye have been the chiefs and rulers in these licentious and lawless practices. However, contrary to the measures ye have dealt, ye have been heard with patience, and though little has or possibly could have been said in excuse or extenuation of your crimes, yet charity makes us hope that a true and sincere repentance, which we heartily recommend, may entitle ye to mercy and forgiveness after the sentence of the law has taken place, which now remains upon me to pronounce. You, David Simpson, William Magnus, R. Hardy, Thomas Sutton, Christopher Moody, and V. Ashplant, ye and each of you are adjudged and sentenced to be carried back to the place from whence ye came, from thence to the place of execution without the gates of this castle, and there within the flood marks to be hanged by the neck till ye are dead. After this ye and each of you shall be taken down and your bodies hanged in chains. Warrant for execution. Pursuant to the sentence given on Saturday by the Court of Admiralty at Cape Corso Castle against David Simpson, William Magnus, R. Hardy, Thomas Sutton, Christopher Moody, and Valentine Ashplant, you are hereby directed to carry the aforesaid malefactors to the place of execution without the gates of this castle tomorrow morning at 9 of the clock, and there within the flood marks cause them to be hanged by the neck till they are dead, for which this shall be your warrant, given under my hand this 2nd day of April, 1722, to Joseph Gordon, Provost Marshal. Mungo Herdman. The bodies remove in chains to the gibbets already erected on the adjacent hillocks. M.H. William Phillips. It appeared by the evidence of Captain J. Traherne and George Fenn, mate of the King Solomon, that this prisoner was boatswain of the same ship when she was attacked and taken off Cape Apollonia the 6th of January last by the pirates' boat. When the boat drew nigh, they say, it was judged from the number of men in her that they were pirates, and being hailed, answered defiance, at which the commander snatched a musket from one of his men and fired, asking them at the same time whether they would stand by him to defend the ship. But the pirates returning a volley and crying out they would give no quarters if any resistance was made, his prisoner took upon him to call out for quarters without the master's consent, and mislead the rest to the laying down their arms and giving up the ship, to half the number of men and in an open boat. It was further evident he became after this a volunteer amongst them, first because he was presently very forward and brisk in robbing the ship King Solomon of her provisions and stores, secondly because he endeavoured to have his captain ill-used, and lastly because he had confessed to Fenn that he had been obliged to sign their articles that night, a pistol being laid on the table to signify he must do it or be shot, when the whole appeared to be an untruth from other evidence, who also asserted his being armed in the action against the Swallow. In answer to this, he first observed upon the unhappiness of being friendless in this part of the world, which elsewhere, by witnessing to the honesty of his former life, would, he believed, in a great measure, have invalidated the wrong evidence had been given of his being a volunteer with the pirates. He owns, indeed, he made no application to his captain to intercede for a discharge, but excuses it with saying he had a dislike to him, and therefore was sure that such application would have availed him nothing. The court observed the pretences of this and other of the pirates, of a pistol and their articles being served up in a dish together, or of their being misused and forced from an honest service, and was often a complotment of the parties to render them less suspected of those they came from, and was to answer the end of being put in a newspaper or affidavit, and the pirates were so generous as not to refuse a compliment to a brother that cost them nothing, and at the same time secured them the best hands, the best I call them, because such a dependence made them act more boldly. Guilty. Harry Glasby, Master. There appearing several persons in court who had been taken by Robert's ship, whereof the prisoner was master, their evidence was accepted as follows. J. Traherne, commander of the King Solomon, deposed the prisoner, indeed, to act as master of the pirate ship while he was under restraint there, but was observed like no master, every one obeying at discretion, of which he had taken notice, and complained to him how hard a condition it was to be a chief among brutes, that he was weary of his life, and such other expressions, now out of his memory, as showed in him a great disinclination to that course of living. J. Wingfield, a prisoner with them at Calabar, says the same as to the quality he acted in, but that he was civil beyond any of them, and verily believes that when the brigantine he served on board of, as a factor for the African Company, was voted to be burnt, this man was the instrument of preventing it, expressing himself with a great deal of sorrow for this and the like malicious rogueries of the company he was in, that to him showed he had acted with reluctancy as one who could not avoid what he did. He adds further that when one Hamilton, a surgeon, was taken by them, and the articles about to be imposed on him, he opposed and prevented it, and that Hunter, another surgeon among them, was cleared at the prisoner's instance and persuasion, from which last this deponent had it assured to him that Glasby had once been under sentence of death on board of them, with 2 more, for endeavouring an escape in the West Indies, and that the other 2 were really shot for it. Elizabeth Trengrove, who was taken a passenger in the African Company's ship Onslow, strengthened the evidence of the last witness, for having heard a good character of this Glasby. She inquired of the quartermaster, who was then on board a robbing, whether or no she could see him, and he told her no, they never ventured him from the ship, for he had once endeavoured his escape, and they had ever since continued jealous of him. Edward Crisp, Captain Trengrove, and Captain Sharp, who had all been taken in their turns, acknowledged for themselves and others, who had unluckily fallen into those pirates' hands, that the good usage they had met with was chiefly through the prisoner's means, who often interposed for leaving sufficient stores and instruments on board the ships they had robbed, alleging they were superfluous and unnecessary there. James White, whose business was music, and was on the poop of the pirate ship in time of action with the Swallow, deposed that during the engagement and defence she made, he never saw the prisoner busied about the guns or giving orders, either to the loading or firing of them, but that he wholly attended to the setting or trimming of the sails, as Roberts commanded, and that in the conclusion he verily believed him to be the man who prevented the ships being blown up, by setting trusty sentinels below, and opposing himself against such hot-headed fellows as had procured lighted matches and were going down for that purpose. Isaac's son, lieutenant of the man-of-war, deposed that when he came to take possession of the prize in the king's boat, he found the pirates in a very distracted and divided condition, some being for blowing up, and others, who perhaps supposed themselves least culpable, opposing it. That in this confusion he inquired for the prisoner, of whom he had before heard a good character, and thinks he rendered all the service in his power for preventing it. In particular, he understood by all hands that he had seized and taken from one James Phillips a lighted match at the instant he was going down to the magazine, swearing that he should send them all to hell together. He had heard also that, after Roberts was killed, the prisoner ordered the colours to be struck, and had since shown how opposite his practice and principles had been, by discovering who were the greatest rogues among them. The prisoner, in his own defence, says, when he had the misfortune of falling into the pirates' hands, he was chief mate of the Samuel of London, Captain Carey, and when he had hid himself to prevent the design of carrying him away, they found him, and beat and threw him overboard. 7 days afterwards, upon his objecting against and refusing to sign their articles, he was cut and abused again. That though after this he ingratiated himself by a more humble carriage, it was only to make life easy, the shares they had given him having been from time to time returned again to such prisoners as fell in his way, till of late indeed he had made a small reservation, and had desired Captain Lone to take 2 or 3 moidores from him to carry to his wife. He was once taken, he says, at making his escape in the West Indies, and with 2 more, sentenced to be shot for it by a drunken jury. The latter actually suffered that he was preserved only by one of the chief pirates taking a sudden liking to him and bullying the others. A second time he ran away at Hispaniola, carrying a pocket compass, for conducting him through the woods, but that being a most desolate and wild part of the island he fell upon, and he ignorant how to direct his course, was obliged, after 2 or 3 days' wandering, to return towards the ship again, denying with egregious oaths the design he was charged with, for fear they should shoot him. From this time he hopes it will be some extenuation of his fault. That most of the acquitted prisoners can witness, they entertained jealousies of him, and Roberts would not admit him into his secrets, and withal that Captain Carey and 4 other passengers with him had made affidavit of his having been forced from his employ, which, though he could not produce, yet he humbly hoped the court would think highly probable from the circumstances offered. On the whole, the court was of opinion artists had the best pretension to the plea of force, from the necessity pirates are sometimes under of engaging such, and that many parts of his own defence had been confirmed by the evidence, who had asserted he acted with reluctance, and had expressed a concern and trouble for the little hopes remained to him of extricating himself. That he had used all prisoners, as they were called, well, at the hazard of ill usage to himself, that he had not in any military capacity assisted their robberies, that he had twice endeavoured his escape with the utmost danger, acquitted him. Captain James Skirm. It appeared from the evidence of several prisoners acquitted that this Skirm commanded the Ranger, in that defence she made against the king's ship, that he ordered the men to their quarters, and the guns to be loaded and fired, having a sword in his hand to enforce those commandments, and beat such to their duty whom he espied in any way negligent or backward. That although he had lost a leg in the action, his temper was so warm as to refuse going off the deck till he found all was lost. In his defence, he says, he was forced from a mate's employ on board a sloop called the Greyhound of St. Christopher's, October 1720, the pirate having drubbed him and broke his head, only for offering to go away when that sloop was dismissed. Custom and success had since indeed blunted, and in some measure worn out the sense of shame, but that he had really for several months past been sick and disqualified for any duty, and though Roberts had forced him on this expedition much against his will, yet the evidence must be sensible. The title of captain gave him no preeminence, for he could not be obeyed, though he had often called to them to leave off their fire when he perceived it to be the king's ship. The sickness he alleged, but more especially the circumstance of losing his leg, were aggravations of his fault, showing him more alert on such occasions than he was now willing to be thought. As to the name of captain, if it were allowed to give him no precedence out of battle, yet here it was proved a title of authority, such an authority as could direct an engagement against the king's colours, and therefore he was in the highest degree guilty. John Walden. Captain John Traherne and George Fenn deposed the prisoner to be one of the number who in an open boat piratically assailed and took their ship, and was remarkably busy at mischief, having a pole-axe in his hand which served him instead of a key to all the locked doors and boxes he come nigh. Also in particular he cut the cable of our ship, when the other pirates were willing and busied at heaving up the anchor, saying, Captain, what signifies this trouble of yo hope and straining in hot weather? There are more anchors at London, and besides, your ship is to be burnt. William Smith, a prisoner acquitted, says Walden was known among the pirates mostly by the nickname of Miss Nanny. Ironically, it's presumed from the hardness of his temper. That he was one of the 20 who voluntarily came on board the Ranger in the chase she made out after the Swallow, and by a shot from that ship lost his leg, his behaviour in the fight till then being bold and daring. The President called for Harry Glaspie, and bid him relate a character of the prisoner and what custom was among them in relation to these voluntary expeditions out of their proper ship, and this of going on board the Ranger in particular. And he gave in for evidence that the prisoner was looked on as a brisk hand, that is, as he further explained it, a staunch pirate, a great rogue, that when the Swallow first appeared in sight every one was willing to believe her a Portuguese, because sugar was very much in demand and had made some jarring and dissension between the two companies, the Fortune's people drinking punch when the Rangers could not. That Roberts, on sight of the Swallow, hailed the new Ranger and bid them right ship and get under sail. There is, says he, sugar in the offing. Bring it in, that we may have no more mumbling, ordering at the same time the word to be passed among the crew who would go to their assistance, and immediately the boat was full of men to transport themselves. President. Then every one that goes on board of any prize does it voluntarily? Or were there here any other reasons for it? H. Glaspie. Every man is commonly called by list, and insists in his turn to go on board of a prize, because they then are allowed a shift of clothes, the best they can find, over and above the dividend from the robbery, and this they are so far from being compelled to that it often becomes the occasion of contest and quarrel amongst them. But in the present or such like cases, where there appears a prospect of trouble, the lazy and timorous are often willing to decline this turn and yield to their betters, who thereby establish a greater credit. The prisoner and the rest of those men who went from the Fortune on board the Ranger to assist in this expedition were volunteers and the trustiest men among us. President. Were there no jealousies of the Rangers leaving you in this chase, or at any other time, in order to surrender? H. Glaspie. Most of the Ranger's crew were fresh men who had been entered only since their being on the coast of Guinea, and therefore had not so liberal a share in fresh provisions or wine as the Fortune's people, who thought they'd been borne the burthen and heat of the day, which had given occasion indeed to some grumblings and whispers, as though they would take an opportunity to leave us, but we never supposed if they did it would be with any other design than setting up for themselves, they having, many of them, behaved with greater severity than the old standers. The prisoner appeared undaunted and rather solicitous about resting his stump, than giving any answer to the court, or making any defence for himself till called upon. Then he related, in a careless or rather hopeless manner, the circumstances of his first entrance, being forced, he said, out of the blessing of Lamington at Newfoundland about 12 months past. This, he's sure, most of the old pirates knew, and that he was for some time as sick of the change as any man. But custom and ill company had altered him, owning very frankly that he was at the attack and taking of the King Solomon, that he did cut her cable, and that none were forced on those occasions. As to the last expedition in the Ranger, he confesses he went on board of her, but that it was by Robert's order, and in the chase loaded one gun to bring her to, but when he saw it was a bite, he declared to his comrades that it was not worth while to resist, forbore firing, and assisted to reeve the braces, in order, if they could, to get away, in which sort of service he was busied, when a shot from the man-of-war took off his leg. And being asked, that supposing the chase had proved a Portuguese, why then, says he, I don't know what I might have done, intimating withal that everybody then would have been ready enough at plundering. Guilty. Peter Scudamore. Harry Glaspie, J. Wingfield, and Nicholas Brattle deposed thus much as to his being a volunteer with the pirates from Captain Rolls at Calabar. First, that he quarrelled with Moody, one of the heads of the gang, and fought with him because he opposed his going, asking Rolls in a leering manner whether he would not be so kind as to put him into the Gazette when he came home. And at another time, when he was going from the pirate ship in his boat, a tornado arose. I wish, says he, the rascal may be drowned, for he is a great rogue, and he has endeavoured to do me all the ill offices he could among these gentlemen, that is, pirates. and secondly, that he had signed the pirates' articles with a great deal of alacrity, and gloried in having been the first surgeon that had done so, for before this it was their custom to change their surgeons when they desired it, after having served a time, and never obliged them to sign, but he was resolved to break through this, for the good of those who were to follow. Swearing immediately upon it, he was now, he hoped, as great a rogue as any of them. Captain J. Traherne and George Fenn, his mate, deposed the prisoner to have taken out of the King Solomon, their surgeon's capital instruments, some medicines and a backgammon table, which later became the means of a quarrel between one Wincon and he, whose property they should be, and were yielded to the prisoner. J. Sharp, master of the Elizabeth, heard the prisoner ask Robert's leave to force Comrie, his surgeon, from him, which was accordingly done, and with him carried also some of the ship's medicines. But what gave a fuller proof of the dishonesty of his principles was the treacherous design he had formed of running away with the prize in her passage to Cape Corso, though he had been treated with all humanity and very unlike a prisoner, on account of his employ and better education, which had rendered him less to be suspected. Mr. Child, acquitted, deposed that in their passage from the island of St. Thomas in the Fortune prize, this prisoner was several times tempting him into measures of rising with the negroes and killing the Swallow's people, showing him how easily the white men might be demolished and a new company raised at Angola and that part of the coast. For, says he, I understand how to navigate a ship, and can soon teach you to steer, and is it not better to do this than to go back to Cape Corso and be hanged and sun-dried? To which the deponent replying he was not afraid of being hanged, Scudamore bid him be still, and no harm should come to him. But before the next day evening, which was the designed time of executing this project, the deponent discovered it to the officer, and assured him Scudamore had been talking all the preceding night to the negroes in Angolan language. Isaac Burnett heard the prisoner ask James Harris, a pirate, left with the wounded in the prize, whether he was willing to come into the project of running away with the ship, and endeavour the raising of a new company, but turned the discourse to horse racing, as the deponent crept nigher. He acquainted the officer with what he had heard, who kept the people under arms all night, their apprehensions of the negroes not being groundless, for many of them having lived a long time in this piratical way, whereby the thin commons they were now reduced to as ripe for mischief as any. The prisoner in his defence said he was a forced man from Captain Rolls in October last, and if he had not shown such a concern as became him at the altercation, he must remark the occasion to be the disagreement and enmity between them, but that both Roberts and Val Ashplant threatened him into signing their articles, and that he did it in terror. The King Solomon and Elizabeth medicine chest he owns he plundered, by order of Hunter, the then chief surgeon, who by the pirates' laws always directs in this province, and Mr. Child, though acquitted, had by the same orders taken out a whole French medicine chest, which he must be sensible for me, as well as for himself, we neither of us dared to have denied. It was their being the proper judges made so ungrateful an office imposed. If after this he was elected chief surgeon himself, both Comrie and Wilson were set up also, and it might have been their chance to have carried it, and as much out of their power to have refused. As to the attempt of rising and running away with the prize, he denies it altogether as untrue, a few foolish words, but only by way of supposition, that if the negroes should take it in their heads, considering the weakness and ill lookout that was kept, it would have been an easy matter, in his opinion, for them to have done it, but that he encouraged such a thing was false. His talking to them in the Angolan language was only a way of spending his time and trying his skill to tell 20, he being incapable of further talk. As to his understanding navigation, he had frequently acknowledged it to the deponent Child, and wonders he should now so circumstantiate his skill against him. Guilty. End of section 21. Read by Sandra.